Uh, all right. Thank you, Liam. And great to see everybody here on a beautiful morning, at least here where I am. I do appreciate the interest in our session. First, to begin, my name is Lachlan McKinnon, and I'm a associate professor of history here at Cape Breton University in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, or Unama'ki, the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people here in Canada. Before we begin today, I just wanted to say that, this is the first of our deindustrialization and the environment working group roundtables called Policy and Programs, Deindustrialization and the Environment, although our presenters are presenting on sort of a wide range of themes focusing around this central idea. Today, we're going to hear from 8 scholars whose research examines various intersections of industrial decline, environmental activism, remediation, and transition. Uh, Across these presentations, we'll be hearing about how states, companies, and communities have all responded in different ways to sort of the processes of deindustrialization and the environmental sort of aftermaths that emerge from those processes. We span a number of national contexts, so this will be a particularly interesting session, and I think it's a good one to kick off our series of workshops. So to begin, I'm going to introduce our first presenter. Dr. Greg Wilson is a professor of history at the University of Akron in Ohio, where he teaches courses on United States history, environmental and public history, among other things. In both teaching and research, Dr. Wilson focuses on oral and community histories, and he has published works in this field before, including Above the Shots, an oral history of the Kent State shootings, Ohio, a history of the Buckeye State, and Communities Left Behind, the Area Redevelopment Administration, 1945 to 1965. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Greg. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lachlan. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I will see if I can get my screen going, and then we can get started. All right. Can we all see the regular version, I hope, now? Yes? No?
No, it's presenter view. So you got to
There we
do,
go.
yeah,
That's
there you are.
thought it would do it automatically. It didn't. That's okay. All right, now that we got that sorted out, so let me begin my presentation here. So this is a project I'm working on for our book that we're putting out, hopefully. This is on the Kretschy dump site here in Ohio, where I am. So a short history of the site for you. Between 1948 and 1985, the Kretschy family operated a municipal and industrial 48-acre dump site and a salvage yard. The property fell within the boundaries of what became the Cuyahoga Valley National Park eventually, and the land was incorporated into the park over a series of years. In 1980, the National Park Service purchased 234 acres from the Kretschy family that included the former dump site and salvage yard. The entire site is relatively flat, but it slopes sharply downward into 2 creek beds that then feed into the Cuyahoga River. So the initial inspection of this site in 1986 revealed approximately 1,850 drums containing various paint wastes, solvents, industrial sludges, herbicides, oils, and greases. In addition, the remnants of the scrapyard included car and truck bodies, parts, and tires, and you can see some of that from this picture here from 1981. Analysis of the waste and the soil samples showed the presence of toxic heavy metals, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, among others, as well as PCBs. According to the EPA's National Contingency Plan covering hazardous substances pollution, the Kretschy site met the conditions for removal of these toxic wastes. It also triggered cleanup under Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, otherwise known as the Superfund Law. It's much easier to say. The site represented a threat not just to people, but to wildlife and the ecology as well. And the EPA started cleanup of this site in 1987. Further investigation by the staff at the Cuyahoga Valley National Park showed that not only had cities and townships dumped their waste there, but also large industrial companies in the Cleveland area. The Park Service eventually sued the companies in 1997 under the Superfund law. Responsible parties involved in the litigation included Ford, General Motors, Chevron, Chrysler, 3M, among others. None of them admitted liability, but they all settled court cases with the Park Service by 2002. The United States government and the companies then entered into consent decrees for their role in dumping toxic materials at the Kretschy site. The major consent decree included the Ford Motor Company, which agreed to take on cleanup of the entire site that started in 2005. From then until 2007, 225,000 tons of contaminated soil and debris were removed. Ford and U.S. attorneys agreed to extend the decree so that they could finish the cleanup. That meant another 146,000 tons of materials removed. The final total reached about 50 million to remove the toxic materials and restore the site as a wetland. And this is a current picture I just took a few weeks ago. This was completed in 2021. In 2022, the site received the National Federal Facility Excellence in Site Reuse Award from the US EPA. So this tale that I've narrated for you very shortly here of a cleaner Cuyahoga River, a cleaner valley, is referred as a heroic one here in our region for the people, but also for the ecology of the area. And there's much to admire in that story. The success of both the legislation in the form of the Superfund site and its use against Ford, GM, and other companies should be marked as a positive intervention of the state. But I want to complicate it a bit, considering this Kretschy site through the lens of deindustrialization, through the lens of toxic waste history. We can complicate this a little bit more. And I'm working with several frameworks now to try to help me understand how we can connect this case study to understand the relationship between the environment and deindustrialization. So I'll highlight a few pieces that I'm working with. David and Richard Stradling have argued that deindustrialization opened up political and economic space for the cleanup of the Cuyahoga River. Heavy industries began to shut down in Cleveland and Akron. Environmental concerns about the toxic river and its surroundings could then gain greater support. The creation of the recreation area and then the park was part of this transformation. So the Kretschy story could be an example of this. In other words, without deindustrialization, perhaps this site would not have been cleaned up as it was. A second framework thinks about it from the environmental management state perspective, which elides as much as it reveals. Isolating the story of the river ignores the connections of toxic waste and its removal. In the case of the Kretschy site, the waste did not simply evaporate. It moved around to other locations, causing further environmental contamination and action. In one case, at least, materials went to a hazardous waste incinerator that is located in the predominantly Black area of East St. Louis, Illinois. Andrew Hurley's written about that. Residents there are engaged in a fight for environmental justice against this toxic waste site. We're reminded of the many residues of deindustrialization, in this case, toxic waste. While the newly restored area in the Cuyahoga Park bears no signs of its toxic past, residues simply move to embroil other communities, especially those of Black Americans, in new battles over waste and toxicity. As Akron and Cleveland deindustrialized, the area of the park became greener, but other communities suffered under the weight of toxicity. Finally, if we think about political ecology, that asks us to reconsider and reconstruct the social, political, and economic systems relative to natural resources with an eye towards sustainability. If we think about deindustrialization, we're asked to reconstruct those systems with an eye towards just transitions. Together, political ecology and deindustrialization can provide these deeper insights into the relationship between power of capital, the power of the state, people, and nature. And we can understand how these power imbalances are embedded in economic and environmental issues by thinking about the Kretschy site in this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Lots of interesting material there. I'm sure it'll be a great conversation afterwards. To move on, next I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Valerio Caruso, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies, which is part of the Italian National Research Council, and PhD candidate at the universities of Turin and Florence. A late modern historian, Caruso focuses on urban and industrial environmental history in their research, which focuses heavily also on the connection between deindustrialization and environmental issues, policy, and claim making in the 20th and 21st century. Previously, Caruso has also published on the swamp of East Naples, which was an environmental history published through White Horse Press in 2021. So with that, thank you, Valerio. I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Lachlan. I believe you are viewing my PowerPoint right now, and let me see if this works well, because if I go there, okay, you're viewing it right now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I do it like this, you're viewing my Word with my notes? No? Or the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint, just the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you to the sites of national interest, which are the main polluted areas in Italy. They are just some of the most polluted areas in the Italian peninsula. There are more of those. There are like thousands of sites of regional interests. And then in Italy, we have something that we call orphan sites, where the state cannot find the polluter, the historical polluter. So there are thousands of polluted former industrial areas in Italy, but the sites of national interests are the most studied ones, the ones that are more face tackled by the government, by the Italian government, because they were established in 1998, and every site of national interest is delimited by a decree of the Ministry of the Environment in agreement with the regional authorities. But remediation responsibilities fall under the ministry. Identification parameters mainly concern ecological impact and public health issues, but there are other issues concerned, like the preservation of the landscape, the beauty of the landscape. So it's an aesthetical parameter. Originally, in 1998, there were 15 sites of national interest. Today, there are 42. In 2024, they extended over 0.5% of the national surface area, and 6.2 million people lived in these 42 places, equaling nearly 10% of the national population. Ecologically speaking, each and every scene is the acronym of sites of national interest. Each and every scene has its own ecosystemic issues, but some common ones include the high levels of contamination, often featuring a diverse mix of substances, then the presence of landfills, both legal and illegal, and the overlap of active and abandoned sites, which poses a major challenge in identifying historical polluters. Now, remediation progress has been recognized by both institutional and non-institutional actors for being critically slow. According to the main Italian environmentalist association, which is called Legambiente, in 2013, only 3 sites of national interest completed the remediation process, while just 11 of them completed the phase of characterization of analysis of pollutants. As of 2024, only 5% of the land area has an approved remediation or safety project, while 6% of soils and 2% of groundwater have completed the remediation process. At the current pace, Legambiente believes that it could take an average of 60 years or more to see the process concluded for all 42 sites of national interest. Now, I want to say a couple of things about why is it so slow. It's mainly because of procedural flaws and legal challenges that interact with each other in influencing these delays. I can try and summarize them in 2 key concepts, coordination and control. Regarding control, the national law does not set time limits for completing the characterization of contaminated sites, nor does it fix percentages of completed remediation within a determined period. Instead, the national legislation limits itself to providing implementation and planning guidelines, accompanied by lists of pollutant concentration limits. Just that. This might be a consequence, according to an Italian jurist, which is called Marisa Meli, might be a consequence to the lack of a unified European legislation on remediation, which has been continuously sabotaged by European Union member states since the early 2000s. Concerning coordination, on average, 20 public entities and 69 private entities have been historically involved in a site of national interest remediation procedure. Italy adheres to the European polluter pays principle set in 1972. And since the 2006 Italian Environmental Code, the public administration has to identify every historical polluter. And as far as I know, there are 2 alternatives. Either the state takes the burden of remediation by admitting the impossibility of identifying every polluter, or the American model of establishing a hierarchy between the subjects called upon to bear the costs is followed. Anyways, in large and complex areas, like many sites of national interest are, identifying every historical and present-time polluter is not an easy task, and it generally results in administrative and legal disputes, which in turn slow down the remediation procedure. In reading these disputes through social and cultural lenses, historian Salvatore Adorno has underlined 2 conflicting ideological visions, which are the classical ones. A bureaucratic and statist one, which denounces the responsibility of private entities in using administrative disputes as dilatory tactics to avoid assuming remediation costs, and a liberal vision, which reads these administrative disputes as a necessary form of self-protection for private entities in the face of the inadequacy of public regulation. For instance, according to the main association of Italian industrialists, Confindustria, remediations should not be, quote unquote, should not be an end in itself, and the public sector should focus on simplifying legal procedures and on setting clear paths for investments instead of pursuing command and control approaches. Nonetheless, it should be noted that in 2013, the remediation business in Italy summed up to 3.6 billion euros, in 2016, 30 billion euros, and in 2025, up to 90 billion euros, with a net turnover of 3.5 billion per year and an average 5 billion invested per year in remediations, without mentioning illegal businesses. Ethically speaking, and I conclude, ethically speaking, the public health dimension should be the top priority of any cost-benefit analysis, as the Ministry of Health has clearly shown since the 2007 by confirming a chronic exposure to pollutants. Every year, there were nearly 1,700 excess deaths between 2013 and 2017, and over 11,000 excess hospitalization per year for all causes in all sites of national interest. This included excessive mortality from tumors, for instance. Furthermore, the most recent environmental justice studies carried on by geographers such as Giorgia Scognamiglio, who is following us today, from the University of Rome La Sapienza, has finally shown internal differences between the 42 sites of national interest and inside of them. By moving the observation to the scale of proximity, this groundbreaking study highlighted the quote-unquote double penalization, both environmental and social, suffered by nearly 270,000 Italian citizens. The highest level of disadvantage generally fall in urban or densely populated areas, which figure, Scognamiglio says, as laboratories of environmental justice and injustice. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Valerio. And I'm already seeing some sort of connections between our presentations this morning. If I may, I'll lead into our next presenters, and then at the end of all the presentations, that's when we'll take time to sort of have a broader conversation, and you'll have an opportunity to question each of our presenters or contribute to a broader conversation. So next, I'm pleased to welcome a co-presentation by Dr. Petra Delata, who's an associate professor of history at the University of Calgary and a scholar in residence at the Calgary Institute for the Humanities, where she co-convenes the Energy in Society research group. She was also a Canada Research Chair in the history of energy, and her research now focuses on European and North American energy history after 1945. Joining Dr. Delata will be Julian Roux, an MA student at Concordia University, who is also the recipient of the 2025-2026 Depot MA Fellowship. With a keen eye on concerns around deindustrialization in Estevan, Julian looks at instances of closure, environmental change, and specifically the history of Uranium City and the surrounding area. So I would like to welcome our co-presenters who'll fill us in on the next section.
Thanks, Lachlan. I'll just share my screen so Petra can get started.
Yes, good morning, and from Treaty 7 land. So the title of our contribution is Deindustrialization on Indigenous Land in Northern Canada, Conceptual Challenges. And it is based on our respective research that focuses on deindustrialization and remediation in Indigenous communities in Northern Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories, which you see here, it's Norman Wells, which were the sites of uranium mining and oil drilling. And while we still use some of the empirical results from our research, the main focus of our chapter is to think through the complicated ways that deindustrialization intersects with the environment and Indigenous knowledge systems, as well as historical experiences and practices. If you can move on to the next slide, please. We suggest that it is paramount to engage critically with some of the assumptions underlying core concepts of understanding and analyzing deindustrialization processes, the first one of which for us is the concept of deindustrialization itself, which also necessitates a previous process of industrialization. As other scholars have pointed out, industrialization in the Canadian North has been a colonial project of developmental violence, As a result, some indigenous communities have resisted using the term industrialization when referring or describing the processes on the ground. Especially in extractive industries, development did not translate into more jobs for locals. Instead, it undermined traditional subsistence economies and impacted the environment. How useful is it then to even use the word deindustrialization when researching what happens when these industries close and, more importantly, leave behind contaminated land and water, corroding equipment, and poisoned people, more so than jobs? And I pass it on to Julian.
Thanks, Petra, and thanks to the roundtable organizers. I have a few photos from my recent trip to a decommissioned uranium mine site in northern Saskatchewan that might be useful for thinking about post-mine closure landscapes, remediation, and on-the-ground realities. This first image is a section of the old mine site. The area around me and for for a few hundred meters is covered in waste rock, all of it placed in during decommissioning in the 1980s. You can see kind of a contrast between the new growth and waste rock covered area in the foreground with the old growth in the background. This suggests to me that there are limits to any kind of total restoration of the area. Although accessible to the public, this area remains subject to ongoing monitoring for toxic materials through the Saskatchewan government's institutional control program. As ecological geographer Jessica Weir highlights, Indigenous scholars have routinely critiqued modernist expressions of terms like environment and management as too often placing humans above nature instead of centering human relations to nature. Similarly, we can apply this critique to the concept of remediation. Following Weir, one alternative way of thinking about remediation or land management that advances a justice-oriented positioning concerns prioritizing Indigenous sovereignty, family, and economic well-being, which goes beyond a simple smoothing over of environmental damages based in scientific determinations of acceptable contamination. On this slide, we see some more physical representations of the old mining operations in these stainless steel raise covers that are anchored to the surface rock. During decommissioning, some of the surface cavities were backfilled with waste rock while others were left open. Only recently were many of these cavities covered, these two in 2017. Additionally, a number of boreholes were sealed that were contributing to the leaking of flooded mine stopes into the surrounding lakes and streams. So the mine caps are marked with identification tags that denote when the cavity was sealed and to contact the Saskatchewan Ministry of the Environment if they become damaged. The institutional control program plan for these sites suggests regular checkups and testing until 2125. In John Sandlos and Arne Keeling's recent book, The Price of Gold, they deployed the Pandora's Jar narrative as a useful metaphor to grasp the life and afterlife of mining. At the Giant Mine gold mine next to the northern city of Yellowknife, 237,000 tons of arsenic trioxide created through the milling process was deposited below the surface during the mine's operation. To limit or prevent this toxic substance from further leaching into the surrounding ecosystem, the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board suggested in 2013 to freeze the stores for up to 100 years while research continues on a more permanent decision. This ameliorated some concerns of the Yellowknife's Dene and non-Indigenous local residents. However, the question of this remaining a forever project still lingers. The connection between that context and this one you see here and other former mine sites is that remediation and management of toxic sites often relies on an assumed permanence of the state, which perpetuates a logic of ownership that potentially undermines Indigenous sovereignty. The Pandora's jar metaphor is useful in that it suggests a possibility that the problems released in the literal opening up of the earth can never be put back. As researchers concerned with the effects of industry and mine closure on local communities and their surroundings, I don't think that these considerations are foreign to many of us here. In numerous studies, questions of who benefits from so-called remediation are often front of mind, especially as it relates to gentrification or ongoing profit generation through zoning schemes that essentially perpetuate ongoing dispossession. However, what is important to doubly consider when engaging in this type of research in colonial contexts is how remediation continues to perpetuate colonial dispossession through the naturalization of the state and the prevention of indigenous sovereignty over their homelands and their futures. And I'll pass it back to Petra.
And so here's an example from the Norman Wells in the Sato region. This is actually a photograph, and it refers to the canal trail cleanup, which has been completed. But as you can see, there is still a lot of things that have not been cleared off, and it has been a long political process by the community to engage with this. Very often, issues of costs are named, and also who is liable for this, because this was a project dating back to World War II, where the United States were involved. If we move on to the last photo, this is a photo that was taken by Jonathan Yakalaya, one of the Sato Dene partners in our project, who's using drones to document sumps. So when you drill for oil, you are required to move everything in one sump, which hasn't been lined actually with plastics until the 1970s. And so there are major impacts that go well beyond that little sump site that you see in front of the helicopter there, because it actually not only seeps into the ground, but it also is very salty and attracts wildlife, which changes the way that wildlife actually goes through these places. And so one of the main things that we really are dealing with is in what ways and who is responsible when it comes to remediation, but also when you have different understandings of what has been impacted in terms of the environment, because the Sato Dene will insist that oil drilling has impacted wildlife, water, land, and ways of life. And so that's a much broader understanding of what needs to be remediated and will be much more difficult to do. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Petra and Julia. And those are beautiful photos. It really illustrated your point very well, right? To have those landscapes on the screen. If I can, I'll now move ahead to our next presenter. Dr. Christine Wally, if she's ready to present now. I know originally was scheduled for later, but for the sake of time, perhaps I'll ask Dr. Wally if they'd be able to present at this time. Would that be all right, Chris? Okay, I take that as a yes. So Dr. Wally is the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences Dean's Distinguished Professor of Anthropology and Head of Anthropology at MIT in the US. For the past 20 years, Dr. Wally has conducted research in the former steel mill community of Southeast Chicago, where she grew up, including an autoethnographic book, Exit Zero, which is one of my favorites, as well as directing a collaborative community-based project focusing on deindustrialization in that part of Chicago through the Southeast Chicago Archive and Storytelling Project. So thank you, Dr. Wally.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Great. And this is, I'm going to be collaborating with Lachlan and Arthur McIver for the June conference, but a part of my research also deals a lot with questions of sacrifice zones and remediation. So I'm going to be presenting on that. So my research historically that Lachlan was mentioning focuses on the former steel mill region known as the Calumet, which includes Southeast Chicago and Northwest Indiana. At its peak, it had about 120,000 steel workers. In this image, when we created this, it was about 9,000, but now it's down to about 3,000. Oops, sorry. So For a number of years now, I've been collaborating with an all-volunteer community museum in the region to create something called the Southeast Chicago Archive and Storytelling Project at sechicagohistory.org. The website has an archive and also for interactive documentaries created from objects that people in the community have saved. The last documentary that we recently completed is one called From Wetlands to Waste that charts the environmental history of the area. And so the Calumet is an indigenous name that was used to refer to the region's historic wetlands, which was once the largest wetlands complex in the Great Lake regions. And this shows some of the Potawatomi villages that had been in this area. We also have, if you go to the full interactive documentary, we found I got access to wildlife specimens that were in the Field Museum from the area from the 1890s, and we created the animated graphic of some of these. And this image will show you the brown areas are areas that were filled in with slag from the steel mills. Since the closing of the steel mills in the 1980s and 90s, the region is now what I'd refer to as para-industrial, meaning a mix of defunct and ongoing industry running side by side, as well as brownfield and landfill sites. And there's the industry that's gone, even the industry that's there, pretty much all of it is devoid of jobs at this point. Community environmental groups in Southeast Chicago refer to the region as a sacrifice zone, and they've been fighting. There's been ongoing environmental battles for quite some time. This is a comic book created by a youth activist group in Southeast Chicago. And I should just mention that the area historically has been a mix of white residents, largely from Eastern European backgrounds, Mexican Americans, and Black Americans, all of whom historically came to work in the steel mills. So I'm just going to show you a couple of images from the website that we created and then throw out 2 points for policy relating to policy and remediation in the region. And sorry, I didn't have a chance, Lachlan, to time this beforehand. So when I get about 1 minute out, if you could let me know, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
So for residents in this area, life was historically lived in intense intimacy with industry. In the interactive documentary, we use a lot of artifacts to kind of show that intimacy. One of the things we also try to do is create visual diagrams to kind of convey some of this environmental history. We created a diagram of the steel mill making process. And if you're on the live version, you can hover over the different pieces of the steel making process and it will show you some of the pollutants and that were released as part of the process. And there's a list of PDF with bibliography that you can also check out. So a great deal of the waste in the region came from the history of steelmaking. Many of the former steel mill sites are now Superfund sites, which are the most polluted sites in the US, as was mentioned earlier. But it's important to note, as was known in some of the earlier presentations, that the waste extended well beyond the steel industry. The city of Chicago has dumped most of its waste in this region. This is a photo of a lake that was within Chicago. That was a third of it was filled in with garbage. By the 1980s, Chicago had 90% of the landfills in the city of Chicago, so 51 landfills, 423 hazardous waste sites. The Illinois EPA said that it was the largest concentration of waste in North America at one point. Another diagram that we created is one about histories of environmental conflicts within this region. And so if you go to the live version, you can click on any of these and get some history about them. I don't have a chance to talk about it, but this is a really interesting story of a landfill that has to do with mafia and goats and a whole range of other things. I can talk about it in the Q&A if anybody's interested. But it gives you some sense, this diagram gives you some sense of the history of environmental conflicts in the region. And it's noteworthy that the environmental activism appeared around the landfills and not the steel industry because of the jobs issues. And people were, everybody hated the landfills, partly also because they decreased home values. So the closing of the mills brought socioeconomic devastation to the region. We have an internet active documentary also with that. But the pollution didn't end with the closing of the mills. So there is some ongoing industry as well as many deindustrialized sites and brownfield sites and Superfund sites in the area. But so what is getting put into these deindustrialized areas today? And I'm really curious to know from others how this is playing out. But one of the things that we're seeing in Southeast Chicago, like what's the kind of stuff that is coming in? one of the things is unconventional oil and gas production. So one of the main things that came into Southeast Chicago was pet, which is a byproduct from the refining of the Canadian tar sands that was being stored in massive uncovered piles, which created a lot of backlash in the region. Other things that we're seeing, and sorry, there's a pet coke image. I don't have, sorry, I'll just stop sharing right there. I don't have images of some of the other things, but some of the newer things that are coming in are things like a quantum computing facility, for example, data centers. There's some renewables coming in, although under the Trump administration, we don't know about that. So a couple issues here. Even with the green stuff, and obviously we need the renewables, but even with the green stuff, there's also a lot of environmental issues potentially related for people in the area, including massive use of water and electricity. And so there's those kinds of issues. Sorry, I lost my place here. But one of the other things to throw out also is that whether it's unconventional oil and gas, whether it's ongoing industry, whether it's the greener alternatives, quote unquote, none of these come with jobs. Even though they're being sold to residents, is we're going to bring jobs back to the area, but actually none of them have any kind of sizable number of jobs. So a couple policy related kinds of questions around this. Questions around job loss being linked to automation in areas like this. And one of the kind of policy questions kind of more broadly, thinking about how across different countries automation is playing out and the extent of replacement of workers. And that's something that's obviously happening everywhere. But in the United States, for example, because we don't have a national healthcare policy, there's a lot of incentive for employers then to want to get rid of workers precisely because they don't want to pay for health. So how are other kinds of policies getting tied up into these kinds of questions? What happens to deindustrialized places? What happens to jobs? And just another policy thing that I will throw out here is that for the city of Chicago, its attitude towards Southeast Chicago as a region is completely contradictory. So on the one hand, Chicago's a pretty green city for the most part, and it has been, downtown is beautiful, and they've been expanding, making it much greener than it used to be a couple decades ago. And part of them, there's partly an interest in doing the same thing in Southeast Chicago. How do we revitalize the wetlands? But on the other hand, the area is also zoning. The zoning here, it's the only area in the city of Chicago that's zoned for this level of hazardous waste and for really heavy industrial use. It's also a tax increment zone, so that's an area designated for redevelopment. So there's competing government agencies. So some of them are trying to green the area, and others, any kind of polluting industry that comes in, they're still trying to put it into the area. So the city itself is very much in kind of conflict about these questions and how it relates to Southeast Chicago. So one of the questions I'd love to hear more about, and heard some in the discussion about Italy, the question about how zoning exactly works across different regions and what are the environmental implications and how that differs across areas. That's it. Thank you. Oop. Great.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wally. All right, next we have joining us another co-presentation. I'd like to welcome Dr. Indranil Chakraborty and Dr. Shuvik Mukhopadhyay, who will be presenting their collaborative paper, which they'll be working on through Depot. Dr. Mukhopadhyay is an associate professor of the Department of History, University of Calcutta. Previously served in an undergraduate college, earned a PhD from the Department of History, Visva Bharati, and has worked upon the interrelations between sort of military organizations and society in early medieval South India, but has also published on the life and experiences of sort of political freedom fighters and political leaders in India, as well as working on a number of multidisciplinary projects looking at the cultural politics of connected histories. In collaboration, we also have Dr. Indranil Chakraborty, who is a faculty member at the Lawrence Kinlan School of Business, Fanshawe College in Canada, and who serves as a research associate with the Deindustrialization of the Politics of Our Time project. Previously, Indra worked as a journalist for the Financial Express and the Indian Express, and whose interdisciplinary research looks at the intersection of political economy as well as information and media. So I very much look forward to hearing this presentation. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Lachlan, and good morning, everyone. So Shovik can't join. He has sent his regret because of some family emergency. So let me first put the slide here, sharing the slide. And I hope you can see the slides. You all, it's okay? Good?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So, so this is about the city of Durgapur. And just 1 minute, how to do this? Yes. So this is about city of Durgapur. It's in eastern part of India in the province of West Bengal. And while hearing Christine's Southeast Chicago story, the world is a globalized place, I can realize. I can connect that Southeast Chicago story with the Durgapur story that I will narrate now here. So Durgapur, once celebrated as a thriving industrial hub known as the Ruhr of India, that's another connection with German Ruhr, because of its steel plants, thermal power stations, glass factories, and mining and machinery factories, all big factories. And it's established in 1960s as a planned industrial hub. Durgapur steel plants, heavy industries, thermal power stations symbolized India's post-independent self-reliance before economic liberalization led to their decline. Today, much of the vast urban city landscape that grew to realize the self-reliance vision lies as a desolate, listless, and lifeless skeleton. It would not be an exaggeration to rank Durgapur and its industrial landscape among the largest industrial enclaves in Southeast Asia during 1960s, 70s, and early 1980s. And the city grew like this. You can see that between 1961-71, the growth rate was 395%, and then suddenly dropped 81-91, connecting with the new liberalization, opening up of the economy, and all the factories more or less gone, except the steel plant. And then you have 2001 and 2011, 15% and 14% growth. And this is the story of population growth and industrialization, deindustrialization, and then we'll see the reindustrialization that's happening based on service sector. And then you have this mining and allied machinery factory, a big factory. It's a part of the India's plan of self-reliance away from the developed West finance and technological support. So that's what Durgapur used to be. Industrialization has played a vital role in shaping urbanization within the steel city, which has become a key urban industrial complex in India. And its favorable location contributed to its integration into post-independence industrialization movement. By the 1970s, the state had invested heavily in all these industries. So, and after that, the liberalization came, and this is the situation of MAMC now in Durgapur. So pollution was part and parcel of Durgapur's industrialization-based progress. Industrial units emitted various gases like sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and obviously ammonia, fly ash because of the thermal power station. And fly ash is an important industrial waste for coal-fired thermal power stations. The fly ash is so fine and light that it remains airborne for a long time, thus contributing to the air pollution. But in those days, public sector governance, the bureaucratic operations of local and federal pollution control boards frequently fell short of their responsibilities to implement effective measures for maintaining pollution within acceptable limits. The collective social awareness regarding the need for proper environmental checks and balances was significantly less developed than what we observe today. Deindustrialization made things worse in Durgapur. Local governments like municipalities lost their financial power to carry out meaningful welfare activities. The history of post-1980s neoliberal policies is that the government has retreated from its responsibility to build a buoyant public sector enterprise, aiming to develop a self-reliant economy without depending on the developed.
Did we lose Indra?
It
Indra,
seems.
your mic is off, Indra.
Say this. Hello.
Oh, are you there?
Just 1 minute. Is it okay?
We can't see it yet.
You can see? No?
No.
It's still loading the screen share. You just disappeared for a
Yeah,
second. Oh,
my
now we're good.
internet
There it is.
We're
Okay.
good now. Keep going.
Okay. It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know how far I've gone. Okay. So, however, deindustrialization of Durgapur is not the whole narrative. A market economy never loses its horsepower of growth potential when there are redevelopment opportunities. In recent years, investment has surged back into the region, transforming Durgapur into a reindustrialized landscape, focusing on service sector industries like and on health, education, tourism, and all this. And that's why I'm saying that the connection with the Southeast Chicago and Southeast Chicago. So this shift from a public sector driven industrial center with a stable employment and an educated workforce to a predominantly service oriented economy characterized by precarious wage labor and a select few high net worth individuals who dominate these services underscores the new urban development. The result is a gentrified, locally juxtaposed against the clusters of communities in search of their own Eldorados. The expansion of service sector in Durgapur is bolstered by the central government's smart city mission, which aims to enhance urban areas by providing essential infrastructure, fostering a clean and sustainable environment, and improving the quality of life for residents through the implementation of smart solutions. Although launched in 2015, Durgapur is still in the planning phase of this initiative. The Smart City Mission of Durgapur is a testing case for public-private partnerships, PPPs, in environmental governance, utilizing market-driven mechanisms such as green bonds, carbon credits, and corporate-funded green infrastructure for urban development. The projects under consideration include water recycling,
Liam, I think we may have lost Indra again, have we?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Indranil, you're muted now.
Oh,
Can you say
okay.
something?
We can hear you again. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can you see now?
Just a moment. It's loading. Yeah,
Sorry.
you're good.
Yeah. So Durgapur exemplifies the management through public-private partnerships, raising important questions about equity and effectiveness in market-driven sustainability practices. The financially constrained municipality is using PPPs to implement green infrastructure projects, such as water recycling, urban afforestation, and air quality monitoring amid dwindling public funds. This scenario invites an exploration of innovative financing mechanisms, including green bonds and carbon credits. The central inquiry remains whether privatization promotes inclusive sustainability or leads to greenwashing and environmental gentrification. And that's what we are seeing here in Durgapur. So Durgapur records a shift from state-led environmentalism to privatized ecological governance, reflecting global trends in neoliberal urbanism. In this privatized ecological governance, one of the fallouts is whatever social is being out in favor of private activities, such as private EVs, cars, replacing social transport system. And this is the new Durgapur that the government is planning. The industrial city used to have a government-run public bus system, but it vanished from 2005 to 2006, leaving only a few routes now. Greenwashing, like replacing public transport with privatized EVs, and environmental gentrification, like displacing poor residents for green redevelopment, such as creating parks, pose important questions about whether equity has been sacrificed in the name of green.
Yeah, I think Engineer must be having some sort of internet issue
Yeah.
with the connection. Let's see if he doesn't come back in a couple seconds here.
I'll give it a moment.
Yeah.
And when he comes back, maybe we can ask if he can sort of conclude.
Hey, Indranil, I think you might be having some internet issues. Do you mind wrapping up the presentation so we can move on and hopefully there's no more issues?
Is he here?
Are you there, Indranil? Maybe you're on mute.
He's muted.
He's muted. Okay.
Okay, where is he? I don't.
Oh, there he is. Indra, you're muted.
Okay, now sorry for this. Really very unstable internet connection. This is the first time I'm pricing this here. Okay, so the conclusion is that whether this entire thing of creating a kind of, as you can see, a kind of new environment for a kind of green capitalism, is this a just transition that we are waiting for in Durgapur from a kind.
Okay. I think he's gone again.
Right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, fine. I'm done. Sorry.
Okay. So, sorry, Indra. I think there's just some connection difficulties that keeps popping
Yeah. It
out.
was.
Thank you for the
But
presentation.
could you hear something? Like, did you hear? Like,
we could hear a lot, and then periodically it would simply sort of come out.
yeah, exactly.
But perhaps there'll be an opportunity to chat more about this in the question and answer period.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
No problem at all. So next, I would like to invite Dr. David Beorletti, who is a graduate in history from the University of the Basque Country and who holds an international PhD in contemporary history from that institution. Currently, Dr. Beorletti is a co-editor of the bilingual electronic journal Words and Silences and is a member of the Archive of the Memory of the Basque Country. And currently, he is located at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, or UCM, in Madrid. So thank you for joining us today, David. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you see my presentation? I'm trying to chat.
We can see it, yes.
Okay, because I cannot. Let me see if I can, and I can switch the, well, I don't know how did I do. Give me a second. Sorry, I can't see my own presentation right now. I didn't. Oh, sorry. I will share my desktop easier, maybe. Okay. Whoop. So, can you see now?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, lovely. I will start then. So, well, thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing my work. This is an ongoing research that I have been doing for the last 8 months or so I still have a couple of years, so it's still at a very preliminary stage. So it will be very useful to collect your insights, your reflections, and thank you again. I will speak about the toxic legacies of HCH production in Vizcay through oral history in North Spain. Okay, for those of you who doesn't know what is it, is a here people normally refer as it to Linden because Linden was the commercial brand, the commercial use that it was a chemical very used as insecticide and pesticide in pharma industry. It was widely used in the 50s, especially in agriculture, also minor uses in public health, and it is classified now as a persistent organic pollutant. It's banned or restricted in more than 50 countries and listed in the Stockholm Convention of Persistent Organic Pollutants. Well, it's toxic, highly toxic, is also bioaccumulative by the organism and is persistent in the environment. We were talking before about industrial waste and how it moves and travels, so it travels a lot. It likes to travel in water, in the soil, with the wind, and in the human bodies and bodies of non-humans also. Well, as you can see here, it was massively produced in Europe. It was the epicenter of production. It was invented by the Germans. And in Spain, you can see, here is interesting because the production was in 3 places. The biggest was here in Bilbao, where I am established. Then it was here in Sabiñánigo, where they throw everything to the river. It was a tremendous ecological catastrophe. And here in Pontevedra, a small plant. And you can see now that it's spread all over the country. Why? Because there were some illegal dumps, organized crime paying the truck drivers to throw them, and there are some dark issues that I am doing research now. No, well, in the context is the industrialization of Bilbao area. No, 2 factories were opened in an area which was like a big chemical complex in the 50s and 60s, where all kinds of chemical industries were established. We could speak of a sacrifice zone. And in the 80s, they closed these plants, Nexana and Bilbao. One of them was American capital, and the other was Bilbao capital plus a German capital. In the 90s, they start with the first institutional measures of detection, management of residues, and then they start to remediation. There is a very thing, you can only clean or inerticize clean linden. It's a dust, but when this dust is mixed with the soil, as it was the case of the illegal dumps, there is still no way to treat it. This year I saw a PhD that was presented, but still today there is not a use. And the first use requires a lot of money to the EPA because they have the intellectual property on how to clean it, no? Anyways, they were these cells created that I will show you right now in a picture. And right now there are new measures being discussed for how to recover the polluted soils and waters, and also, as I was saying, for the inertization of these hazardous materials. Well, also the 90s was a moment in which a lot of struggles of environmental justice took place regarding this specific issue. There were many different groups, ecologists, but also neighborhood associations that organized different campaigns and lawsuits trying to expose some of the risks and demanding for remediation, pushing for policy change. And we can speak, as some of the interviewees that I speak with say, that it was the big crisis, the big ecological crisis of the 90s in the area. And it became a symbol of toxic legacies, but also the need of ecological accountability in the area. Here you can see the 2 main deposits. Depending who you speak, they say dump, contention, security cells. They change the concept, no? And here this is the airport of Bilbao, and this is the deposit, which is 3 times bigger than the airport. I think it's a unique case in the world in which the airport is over a toxic waste dump. And you can see here is more than 300,000 metric tons. And here is in amount. Here is where they were 2 dumps. So they built the cells next to the dump. Okay, it was like how they built. And this is a hole in a mountain, and it's filled with all the dust, and they cover, no? Well, there has been also some problems with the water because waters are monitored. And as I was saying, this substance travels through the water, and here you can see it was in 2022, and they saw that it was an unusually high amount of lindane in the waters, and they have to close the access. This was the supply of water to this area, and they have to bring the water from other place. Well, the objectives are to understand the toxic legacies of lindane production, to analyze the waste circuit, as our colleagues were saying before, to follow the waste, no? And one of the ways to follow it, since it cannot speak, is to speak with the people that have been working with the waste in the different phases, no? Since the production, industrial workers, the management, and the politicians that took decisions about it, journalists, and so on, no? So I would like to create another history collection to analyze how actors engage with lindane as a toxic legacy, but also heritage. Is interesting, no? How people relate to these toxic legacies in multiple ways, no? To contribute also to denounce the ecological debt that administration and factories have in the area with regarding the habitants, no? And to integrate the study in a wider comparative study that I have conducting with my colleague Andrea Casanova in Brazil. There was a similar plant in Duque de Caxias near Rio de Janeiro, and actually 2 hours ago she sent me an email that she had had a very good interview with one of technician, and we are trying to look for similar profiles, people with a similar profile, in order to follow the residue and compare, no, what is similar, what is different, and so on. This is some of the theoretical framework that I don't have time to speak. Also, Greg was explaining the first book, and well, some other books that regarding the different visions, no? How can we learn about how to deal with this context, with this circumstance, no? Also from a very material perspective, citizen science, struggles for environmental justice, and so on, no? I am also using newspapers because it was, as I say, a very big conflict. So there is a lot of information in the newspapers, no? And involving different organisms, regional governments, European authorities, Spanish government. So there is quite rich, I think. And well, I have conducted 6 interviews with a politician, industrial worker, and some environmental activist, one professor of hydrogeology that was in charge of the polluted waters that I was explaining you before. He was in charge of that research. The technical director, the first person who took the decisions of what to do with that, like more technical decisions, and also a neighborhood who lived in front of the plant, of the production plant, of one of those plants. And now those are some of the people that I would like to interview, no? Like some other activists. This one, for example, Javier Vázquez, people call him Mr. Lindane in the area because he is like the expert, no, that has been decades working on that. The environmental lawyer also that was behind the case, and some people that I think that can be interested to reconstruct this story. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. Now we do have some time, approximately 20 minutes, for questions to all of our panelists. And to make sure that we have enough time, to speak, I'll just turn it quickly over to the audience. So any questions, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll call upon you to ask your question. Okay, well, I suppose, okay. Melissa.
I do have, I have I guess it's a small question, and then I just wanted to follow up on something that Chris said. Well, my first small question was, I actually lived in the Basque Country for 3 years. And so I used to fly into the airport in Bilbao, and so I didn't know that wayside is by the airport. Is that correct?
Yes, actually 3 lines where the planes go. 3 of these lines are literally over the dam.
That's over the wayside, because I attended the University of the Basque Country in San Sebastian, Andalusia. Yeah, so I'm just like shocked. I didn't know of this lindane, stuff. So yeah, I was very fascinated reading all your slides.
Mm.
And the other thing that I just thank you for confirming that. I was very interested in what Chris was saying about the mafia goats and environment. It sounds very similar to a story from my own home region. There's a mafia and stories and environmental things there, and I just wanted to invite you to tell the story. You said if there's a time in Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a crazy story. I'd actually like to do an article on like the biography of each of the different landfills because the landfills all have these crazy stories. So that particular landfill was the rumor in the neighborhood was that it was started by mafia figures to hide dead bodies. And of course, they did not follow regulations for how to set up the the landfill, and so it ended up being 100 feet over regulation height. So it was actually the highest non-structural point in Cook County, where Chicago is located.
Oh,
Um, and it was built poorly, so it was going to start to collapse. And so then there became this fear in the 90s that it was going to create a garbalanche, and it was going to there would be methane combustion, and there was going to be a big fireball. And so the Illinois EPA came in to try to stabilize it, and so they took off the top and tried to stabilize it. And they planted native grasses on it, but it was too steep to be able to mow it. So they brought in a herd of goats to eat
oh,
back the grass, but then the problem was wild dogs were eating the goats, so then they brought in
oh,
sheep dogs to care for the goat herd. So there's this whole like crazy interesting story about the land.